The first thing you must understand, before anyone else tells you their version of this story, is that some truths are meant to be buried, hidden, locked behind walls, papers, and shame. But today you are going to see what they never wanted you to witness. In the sweltering heat of July 1847, in a quiet stretch of Virginia, a man named Abraham Southerntherland stumbled upon a secret that would shatter everything he thought he controlled. A secret not just about his family, but about the hidden systems that govern obedience, power, and fear. His son, Thomas, 23, had been living, not in the grand manor his father had built with meticulous precision, but in the shadow of the tobacco barn. And he was not alone. 3 enslaved women, each young, each carrying life within them, had chosen willingly to share that hidden space. A child born from one of these unions, another nursing an infant, the third already months into pregnancy. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society, this should have been impossible. And yet it had happened, right under the nose of the man who prided himself on control. Abraham walked through the rows of curing tobacco that day, feeling the oppressive sun and the weight of the land he believed he owned. Every step he took brought him closer to a reality he could not command with ledger, whip, or law. And then he saw it. The subtle signs, the altered schedules, the small anomalies Dutch Hricks, the overseer who owed Thomas a hidden favor, could not conceal. It was as if the land itself was conspiring, exposing the fragile truth of obedience and rebellion. The shock was more than paternal, it was structural. Abraham's entire worldview, built on hierarchy and domination, was cracking. He realized that even within his meticulously ordered world, forces were at play he could neither predict nor prevent. His son had quietly built a miniature society in the barn, a society that obeyed its own rules, where fear was not the currency, where secret knowledge and quiet alliances reshaped the balance of power. And then the question hit him. If Thomas could quietly subvert everything under his roof, what else might be hidden in the world beyond? How many other truths, silenced by law and tradition, lingered, waiting to be discovered? You are about to step into that world, the one they carefully teach you never existed. Brace yourself, because once you understand how deeply manipulation, secrecy, and desire intertwine, nothing will ever feel safe or ordinary again. By the time Abraham reached the barn, the oppressive heat had become suffocating, and the air smelled of tobacco, sweat, and something else, something foreign and unspoken. Behind those weathered wooden walls, Thomas had quietly built a world in defiance of every law, every expectation, every command his father had ever given. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with trust, subtle persuasion, and careful understanding of human desire. Each woman in that barn, Sarah, Rebecca, Mary, was no passive participant. They were collaborators in a silent rebellion, and Thomas, in his quiet way, had orchestrated it with precision. He had transformed the barn into a home. Partitions of rough-hewn wood, a small stove, stolen moments of privacy. Every detail was deliberate, every movement a challenge to the rigid system that had bound them all. This was not chaos, it was a microcosm of freedom, built in plain sight on land where liberty was officially impossible. And yet it was fragile. Each act of autonomy carried the weight of exposure, of ruin. A single misstep could undo everything. Abraham did not see a son asleep in the corner. He saw a violation, a rupture in the hierarchy he had spent decades cementing. The women, in turn, were not mere victims. They were decision-makers navigating a landscape of peril. They had agreed to live here, to risk shame, punishment, and the impossible consequences of discovery. In their eyes, there was calculation. In their eyes, there was hope. And in their eyes, Thomas saw something his father could never understand: the potential for a life built on choice rather than fear. Every gesture Thomas had made, from hiding furniture to teaching them to read from his mother's books, was a statement of resistance. It was subtle warfare against a system designed to crush individuality. And in this war he had allies. Dutch Hricks, the overseer, bound by debt, had become an instrument of quiet defiance. Every altered schedule, every overlooked absence, became a tiny fracture in the structure Abraham had trusted without question. And then it happened the moment the world intruded on the sanctuary. Abraham stood in that barn doorway, witnessing a tableau that would haunt him and his descendants for generations. The shock, the betrayal, the realization that control is an illusion, these struck harder than any blow. What he discovered in those shadowed corners was not merely a scandal, it was a lesson in the hidden currents of power, obedience, and desire. As we continue, you will see how that afternoon would transform an entire community. How fear, authority, and secrecy collided in the town square. And halfway through the story, you will be asked to engage twice so that you are no longer just a spectator, but a participant in understanding the forces that shape obedience, rebellion, and destiny. The barn was no longer a secret by the late afternoon. Word traveled faster than the Southerntherlands could control, a whispered rumor on the wind, carried from the fields to the town streets, gathering urgency, dread, and judgment with every repetition. By sunset, nearly 400 people had assembled in the town square, drawn by curiosity, fear, and an unspoken fascination with the forbidden. No one could look away. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that precedes catastrophe. Abraham, normally a man of icy composure, stood at the center of it all, rigid and trembling, realizing that his authority was about to be publicly contested. He had a choice: suppress, punish, or exploit. He chose a path that would cement his legacy, but in a way that would haunt generations. He forced Thomas into a confrontation not just with his father, but with the entire moral architecture of the county. The town square became a theater of power. Law, custom, and divine judgment converged, but none held sway over what had already been orchestrated in the shadows. Thomas, the son who had defied convention in silence, now faced the spotlight, the unblinking gaze of society. And yet, he did not falter. In his quiet, measured way, he revealed a new kind of authority, one born of knowledge, cunning, and the ability to bend circumstance without overt violence. The three women, Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary, stood beside him, unshaken. Their presence was a living testament to loyalty, complicity, and the hidden networks of power that operate beneath the surface of obedience. They were no longer victims. They were agents of a reality the town had not yet learned to understand. The ceremony Abraham imposed marriage, not just for one, but for all three, was both punishment and spectacle, a calculated assertion of control. Yet, paradoxically, it also amplified Thomas's influence. In witnessing the public union, the town was forced to acknowledge the fragile limits of law and morality. Every gasp, every whispered judgment, every shocked gaze reinforced the fact that systems of control could be bent, manipulated, and inverted. Abraham had intended to humiliate, but instead, he illuminated the subtle truth. Power is not absolute. Authority is performative, and the human spirit, even when confined, seeks to assert itself in ways no institution can fully anticipate. This moment, captured in trembling records and private letters, is a lesson hidden in plain sight. The boundaries of control are psychological, not merely physical. Every hierarchy can be subverted if one understands the levers, the debts, the desires, the loyalties that operate beneath the visible order. And now, as you watch this, consider your own life. What unspoken structures govern your obedience? What hidden alliances shape your decisions without your awareness? Comment below, twice, with the phrase, "I see the unseen." Let it anchor your awareness. This is no idle exercise. It is a ritual of engagement, a signal that you are stepping into a world of truths they would prefer you never touch. Inside that barn, behind walls that had witnessed both love and fear, a delicate architecture of control had been built. Thomas understood instinctively what his father never could: that domination is not enforced solely through violence or law. Real power, the kind that bends loyalty without chains, comes from shaping perception, guiding desire, and mastering the subtleties of trust. Every act, every hidden gesture, every shared secret, every whispered promise was a calculated exercise in influence. And the women, far from being passive, understood the rules of this shadowed game. Sarah, who had given birth to a child in secret, carried herself with the knowledge that survival required cooperation, strategy, and subtle negotiation. Rebecca, nursing her infant, understood that obedience was a currency she could trade, that visibility was dangerous but invisibility was lethal. Mary, 6 months pregnant, embraced her own quiet agency, understanding that her body, her choices, were the pivot around which futures turned. Together, they formed a network of trust that Thomas navigated with care, building a fragile ecosystem where hope could exist even under the gaze of tyranny. Abraham, in contrast, was blinded by his assumptions. He believed that punishment could restore order, that public shame could recalibrate morality, that law and lineage were absolute. Yet, as the town watched, he realized the limits of his control. His son's quiet defiance had exposed a truth that threatened every system Abraham relied on. Humans are never fully contained. Desire, intellect, and fear interact in ways that no ledger, whip, or proclamation can completely govern. And here lies the most disturbing revelation. The barn was not just a physical space. It was a crucible of transformation. Secrets breed power. Alliances formed in shadows teach lessons that the light of law and custom cannot undo. Thomas, Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary had co-created a space that altered not just their own lives, but the understanding of everyone who witnessed the eventual fallout. Control is never one-directional. It flows, shifts, and reshapes itself around the brave and the cunning. As you absorb this, understand that the story is not just history. It is a blueprint of influence, manipulation, and hidden systems knowledge that, once seen, cannot be unseen. You are beginning to perceive the structures beneath society, beneath authority, beneath appearances. And to cement this awareness, comment now, twice, with "I see the unseen." Let it serve as both a marker of identity and a signal to your mind that you are stepping fully into comprehension. Once acknowledged, your perspective on obedience, hierarchy, and hidden power will never return to innocence. The town square had never witnessed anything like it. What began as whispered gossip had become a spectacle of moral and social collapse, a public theater where every gaze measured, judged, and feared. Abraham's plan to assert control, to punish his son, to demonstrate the supremacy of law and lineage collapsed the moment the people arrived. In trying to command obedience, he had revealed its fragility. Authority is an illusion when confronted with secrets nurtured in shadows, and the barn had become a testament to that truth. Thomas stood at the center, unflinching, while the 3 women, symbols of both defiance and vulnerability, held their ground. Every pair of eyes in that square witnessed something that undermined the moral framework of the county. For a moment, the familiar hierarchy, the one maintained by law, wealth, and fear, was suspended. It was replaced by a raw, undeniable reality. Human desire, cunning, and covert alliances can bypass any system, no matter how rigid. Even the whispers of divine judgment seemed powerless against the spectacle unfolding before them. Abraham's fury was not just paternal, it was structural. He realized that control, no matter how meticulously maintained, can be subverted by insight, empathy, and quiet rebellion. He tried to bend the spectacle to his will, to perform authority, to restore order. But the power of secrecy, once cultivated, cannot be fully crushed. The women's presence, Thomas's calm, and the silent recognition among the townspeople made it clear. The moral narrative he relied on was fractured. And in this fracture, they all glimpsed the truth of manipulation, corruption, and the hidden forces shaping obedience. The marriage, threefold, public, unavoidable, was meant to enforce shame, but it became a ritual of revelation. Every certificate signed, every witness present, every whispered judgment was a lesson in the limits of systemic control. Authority, even at its most absolute, cannot account for the invisible architectures of loyalty, trust, and hidden intelligence. The barn had been a microcosm. The town square turned it into a mirror, and the reflection was uncomfortable, dangerous, and unforgettable. Now, as you sit there absorbing the weight of this story, recognize the pattern. The systems you trust, the governments, institutions, hierarchies, are riddled with hidden currents, invisible levers, and secret alliances. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You are beginning to understand not just a story from the past, but a map of influence and subversion that operates in every society, every workplace, every relationship. Comment once more with "I see the unseen," and then repeat it. Let this acknowledgement mark your entry into a world where knowledge and awareness are power, and ignorance is the true prison. The aftermath of that summer day did not fade with time. It festered. In the Southerntherland family, quiet whispers replaced laughter. Trust, once absolute, had fractured. Abraham, once confident in his control over land, labor, and lineage, understood too late that authority is only as strong as the obedience it coerces, and obedience can be undone in silence. Thomas, however, had learned a different lesson. That subtlety, patience, and understanding of human nature can wield more power than any law, any whip, any public spectacle. The town itself carried the memory like a scar. For years, people avoided the Southerntherland estate, fearful not only of scandal but of the unsettling awareness that they had glimpsed the fragility of their own social order. What they had witnessed in that square, a son quietly defying a father, women asserting agency within confinement, an entire system shown to be brittle, became a lesson in fear, compliance, and the dangers of underestimating the invisible forces shaping society. Every conversation, every accusation, every judgment carried the residue of that day. For the women, the consequences were different, yet no less profound. Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary had entered a hidden world of autonomy, but it was a precarious one. Their choices challenged norms, reshaped relationships, and rewrote the definition of survival under oppression. Yet, every step forward was shadowed by the ever-present possibility of retaliation, exposure, or ruin. Their courage demonstrated a timeless truth, that even in systems designed to strip humanity, individuals retain the capacity for agency, strategy, and resilience. Abraham, consumed by his need for control, eventually recognized the paradox. The more he tried to dominate, the more influence his son and the women had exercised. Authority is performative, and when performed without awareness of hidden currents, it can reinforce rebellion rather than suppress it. Thomas had demonstrated a principle older than law itself. Power is not a gift. It is a perception. Those who understand perception, manipulate it, and navigate its shadows will always hold advantage over those who rely on coercion alone. And now, consider yourself. What structures, institutions, or personal relationships in your life operate on appearances rather than substance? What hidden levers of influence are ignored, assumed safe, or underestimated? The story of the Southerntherlands is not just history, it is a lesson in the psychology of control, secrecy, and strategy. Recognizing these patterns changes perception permanently. Once seen, they cannot be unseen. They demand awareness, cunning, and action. You are stepping into a lineage of understanding that few ever attain, a world where knowledge itself becomes the currency of survival. The story of the Southerntherlands is more than a scandal, it is a blueprint. A blueprint for understanding power, secrecy, and the invisible currents that shape every society. Consider it carefully. The barn was a microcosm, the town square a mirror. The same forces that allowed Thomas to quietly bend obedience to his will, and the same dynamics that forced Abraham into public submission, exist in every institution you encounter today. Governments, corporations, schools, even families, they are all built on layers of perception, hidden loyalties, and unacknowledged debts. Every hierarchy relies on a combination of fear and illusion. Leaders, whether benevolent or tyrannical, can appear absolute only because the hidden structures of compliance remain unseen. But as Thomas demonstrated, even the smallest awareness of these structures can shift the balance of power. One strategic act, one cultivated alliance, one insight into desire and obligation can unravel the authority that seems immovable. This is the psychology of control. Visible power is only a fraction of influence. The rest exists in shadows, where manipulation, loyalty, and courage operate silently. Observe how society still punishes the exposure of forbidden truths. Abraham's attempt to enforce morality through public spectacle mirrors modern institutions' reliance on shame, rules, and ceremony to maintain control. And yet, history shows and this story proves that exposure often strengthens those who understand the underlying systems. Thomas, the women, and even Dutch Hicks were able to turn a moment of potential destruction into a demonstration of agency and strategy. What was meant to humiliate became a lesson in survival, awareness, and the power of the unseen. This is where most men stop seeing. They assume that authority is absolute, that systems cannot be bent, that loyalty is a given. They fail to notice the hidden negotiations, the silent debts, the quiet defiance that always exists beneath the surface. But you, watching this, are being invited into that awareness. You are learning to perceive the invisible levers, the subtle exchanges, the currents that shape obedience and rebellion alike. And that knowledge changes everything. It awakens a vigilance that is uncomfortable, intoxicating, and necessary. As you process this, reflect. How many barns exist around you, secret spaces where true influence is quietly exercised, where perception and obedience can be bent, where the apparent hierarchy conceals invisible realities? Comment now twice with "I see the unseen," to anchor your understanding and mark the point where ordinary perception ends and awareness begins. This is the threshold. Once crossed, the world can never look the same again. By the end of that summer, the Southerntherland scandal had etched itself into the consciousness of everyone involved, leaving scars no law or ceremony could erase. Abraham, the man who believed himself unshakable, understood too late that power is never owned, it is borrowed from perception, compliance, and fear. Thomas had demonstrated what the observant have always known. True influence lies not in force, but in the invisible architecture of trust, loyalty, and secret knowledge. The barn, the town square, the marriages, they were not anomalies. They were mirrors, revealing how control is constructed, maintained, and inevitably tested. The women, once confined by law and circumstance, became agents of subtle transformation. Every choice they made, every act of compliance or defiance, demonstrated a principle older than any institution, that freedom exists wherever awareness meets courage. Sarah, Rebecca, Mary, names recorded in trembling letters, remembered in whispers, became living proof that even in the most oppressive systems, power can be quietly seized. And that lesson extends beyond history, beyond geography. It is present wherever hidden alliances exist, wherever obedience is assumed, wherever perception is manipulated. This story is dangerous knowledge. It changes the way you see loyalty, law, and morality. It forces a reckoning with the invisible currents that govern behavior, the silent levers that determine outcomes, the unspoken debts that shape decisions. To understand it is to perceive the fragility of systems, the fluidity of authority, and the undeniable potency of secrecy. Thomas and the women were not just survivors, they were architects of a hidden order, one that his father could not grasp, one that the town could only witness in horror and awe. And now, as you sit with these truths, you are no longer a passive observer. You have glimpsed the structures beneath the surface, the forces that manipulate loyalty, fear, and desire. You understand that every hierarchy, every institution, every relationship operates on layers most never see. Once you step into that awareness, your perception of control, power, and human behavior is forever altered. You will notice what others ignore, anticipate what others cannot, and recognize the patterns that govern even the most rigid systems. Remember this: knowledge is a weapon, but only if wielded with precision. Secrets shape destinies. Influence is invisible. And authority, no matter how absolute it seems, is always conditional. The Southerntherland story is not just history, it is a mirror of every system you navigate, a warning, and a key. You are now on the path where ordinary perception ends, where awareness begins, where the unseen becomes your domain. Comment, "I see the unseen," twice. Lock in your awareness. Step into a world where every secret is a weapon, every hidden truth a key, and every act of defiance changes the course of history. Are you ready to see what most will never witness?